For 3 years, Margaret Chen had owned the Silver Spoon Diner on Route 47. She knew every regular by name, remembered how they took their coffee, and could predict what they'd order before they sat down. But there was one visitor who remained, a mystery. The boy appeared every Tuesday and Thursday morning, right around 7:30. He looked to be about 11 or 12, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and an oversized blue hoodie. He wore regardless of the weather. He never spoke, not once. He'd slip into the back booth, pull out a worn notebook, and draw while the breakfast rush happened around him. Margaret noticed things. It was part of who she was. She noticed the careful way he'd smooth out the napkin before placing his pencil on it. She noticed how his clothes, though clean, were threadbare at the cuffs. She noticed the hope in his eyes when she'd bring him water, and the way that hope dimmed when he'd check his empty pockets. The first time she'd brought him breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, he'd looked at her with such confusion that her heart had cracked a little. She'd simply smiled, patted his shoulder, and said, "Growing boys need to eat." He'd pulled out a small notepad and written in careful letters, "I can't pay." Margaret had shaken her head. Who said anything about paying this once on the house? That became their routine. Twice a week, the boy would come in, and Margaret would bring him breakfast, sometimes pancakes, sometimes eggs and bacon, always with orange juice. He'd eat slowly, savoring every bite, and then he'd draw until the school bus rumbled past on the highway. Then he'd write "thank you" on his notepad, show it to Margaret with those serious dark eyes, and slip away like morning mist. Margaret's husband Paul had asked about the boy once. She'd explained it simply. "He's hungry, and I have food. That's all there is to it." Paul, who'd been with her for 32 years, had just nodded and squeezed her hand. That was one of the 1,000 reasons she loved him. The other waitresses knew about the arrangement. Betty, who'd been slinging hash for 40 years, had her own theories. "Foster kid, probably," she'd say, refilling the coffee pot. "Seen it before. Systems overwhelmed. Kids fall through the cracks." Young Alicia, working her way through community college, would save the best fruit from the kitchen for his plate. "Extra strawberries today," she'd whisper to Margaret with a conspiratorial smile. On one particular Thursday morning in October, something felt different. The autumn air had that crisp quality that Margaret had always loved, the kind that made her think of fresh starts and possibilities. The diner was warm and golden with morning light streaming through the wide windows. She'd tied her hair back in her usual neat bun, smoothed down her tan apron, and was preparing the boy's regular order when she heard it. A distant thrum that grew louder, then louder still. The coffee cups began to rattle in their saucers. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Margaret looked out the window and felt her breath catch. Two massive military helicopters were descending toward the parking lot, their rotors creating whirlwinds of dust and autumn leaves. The boy, sitting in his usual booth, had gone very still. His pencil hovered over his drawing, and Margaret saw something she'd never seen before in his face: recognition, followed quickly by fear. The helicopters landed with powerful precision. Margaret stood frozen, spatula in hand, as the door of the diner opened. A man in an impeccably tailored navy suit strode in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He had graying temples and carried himself with the kind of authority that filled a room. His eyes scanned the diner quickly, efficiently, then locked onto the boy in the back booth. The man's face transformed. All that authority melted into something raw and desperate and human. "James," he breathed. The boy James stood slowly. His hands were shaking. The man crossed the diner in long strides, then stopped a few feet away, as if afraid to come closer. "James," his voice cracked. "I've been looking everywhere, everywhere. Do you know how many miles we've covered? 3 states. Son, 3 states. Margaret watched, understanding beginning to dawn. As one of the officers quietly explained, the man was Colonel Robert Hartford, and James was his son. 6 months ago, James had been in a car accident that had taken his mother's life. He'd survived but lost his ability to speak. The trauma had been too much. 2 months ago, he'd run away from the medical facility where he was receiving treatment. "He's been here?" the colonel asked, turning to Margaret with desperate eyes. "How long?" "About 8 weeks, Margaret said softly. "He comes in Tuesday and Thursday mornings, has breakfast, draws a little, then leaves. You've been feeding him." It wasn't a question. The colonel's eyes had filled with tears. "All this time, someone's been taking care of him. He's a good boy," Margaret said simply. "He just needed some kindness." The colonel turned back to his son. "James, please, I know I wasn't there enough before. I know I was always deployed, always working. And when Mom, he stopped, gathered himself. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But I'm here now, I'm here. And I'm not leaving, not ever again. James stood motionless, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his notepad. He wrote something in his careful handwriting and held it up. Margaret could see it from where she stood. You were never home. The colonel flinched as if struck, but he didn't look away. You're right. You're absolutely right. I thought providing for you meant being away, meant serving the country. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. He took a shaky breath. Your mother tried to tell me. She said you needed your dad, not a hero. I didn't listen. That's on me, son. That's all on me. James wrote again. I miss her. I do too. The colonel whispered. Every single day. And I know I can't bring her back. I know I can't fix what's broken with words. But I'm asking you to. Let me try. Let me be your dad. The dad I should have been all along. The diner was silent except for the soft tick of the clock above the counter. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. Betty was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. James wrote one more thing. Will you stay this time? I resigned my commission. The colonel said. Last week. I'm done. The only mission I have now is you. He held out his hand. Come home, James, please. For a long moment, the boy didn't move. Then he looked at Margaret. She gave him the gentlest smile she could manage and nodded. It's okay, honey. Sometimes we all need to find our way home. James picked up his notebook and his pencil, walked slowly to his father, and took his hand. The colonel pulled him into a fierce embrace, and Margaret saw the boy's arms slowly, hesitantly, wrap around his father in return. Before they left, the colonel approached Margaret. How much do I owe you for all the meals? Margaret shook her head. You don't owe me anything. Please, he insisted. Let me do something. Margaret thought for a moment, then said, there are other kids out there, hungry ones, scared ones. If you want to do something, help them. That's all the payment I need. The colonel nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll set up a fund for kids who need meals. In your name, not in my name, Margaret said firmly. In his mother's, she'd like that, I think. The colonel's face crumpled briefly. Then he straightened. Yes, she would. As the helicopters lifted off, taking James and his father home, Margaret stood in the doorway of her diner. Betty came and stood beside her. Then Alicia. The morning rush would start soon. There would be eggs to crack and coffee to pour and toast to butter. But for now, they just stood together, watching the sky. You did a good thing, Betty said quietly. Margaret thought about that, about the simple act of feeding a hungry child, about how the smallest kindnesses could ripple outward in ways you never expected, about how everyone, even colonels and lost boys, sometimes just needed someone to see them and say, you matter. We all did, Margaret finally said. We just treated him like he belonged, and really, wasn't that what everyone wanted? To belong, to be seen, to know that somewhere in this big, complicated world, there was a place where someone would save you a seat and remember how you liked your eggs. The sun climbed higher, golden light spilling across the parking lot. Margaret turned back to her diner, back to the life she'd built with kindness and coffee and those small, steady gestures that held the world together. There would be other lost souls who found their way to her door. There always were, and she'd be here, ready with a warm meal and a gentle smile, reminding them that they mattered. That was enough, that had always been enough.